In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Like Alexander and his army, I'm venturing into hostile and challenging territory to find a trace of one extraordinary city. Oh, wow. Alexander is reputed to have founded beside the river Oxus. Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people. I'm going to explore a series of ruins that may hold the key, both to Alexander's lost city and to an astonishing civilization that flowered here thousands of years before the Greeks arrived. This is the story of how the Greeks built a dazzling eastern capital in a remote corner of Afghanistan, the city of Lady Moon. Alexander the Great is the iconic hero of ancient Greece. In a series of victories, Alexander crushed his Persian enemy, Darius III, and claimed for himself the title of Emperor of the East. But Alexander's conquest in Central Asia may not have been all it appears. I want to separate the fact from the fiction. As Alexander pushed his way deeper into Persian territory, he came up against intense resistance. In the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdia, local tribes fought his army in pitched battles every step of the way. It took all the Greeks' resources just to garrison the territory they'd claimed. Legend has it, Alexander founded as many as 16 cities in Central Asia alone. But today, we know that more than half of these cities were already established when Alexander arrived. Settlements Alexander renamed, and little else. There's only one place we know for sure was built by Alexander. And archaeologists believe all he constructed here was a wooden fort. The rest of his cities have never been found. If I can find a trace of just one ancient metropolis built at Alexander's command, it would mean that there is some truth behind the legend. And there's one fabled city upon the Oxus River that I want to find. I'm following the tracks of Alexander into Afghanistan. Today, this region is a desert, covered with rutted sand tracks that lead everywhere and nowhere. I've met up with my driver Habib and our guide Reza. We're searching for one of Alexander's river crossing points, but we're already lost. Can we ask them? I mean, hopefully these guys are going to know where the crossing is.
Assalamu alaikum.
We've come down here, and we're just there.
The village?
Yeah. And see, it says it crosses here, but no.
Well, life's going to get very interesting. We don't even know if we can cross the river.
We're heading west to find the ancient ruin of Kazal. It sits upon the confluence of the Oxus and its largest tributary, the Kunduz River. This was once a strategic defence post in the land of Bactria, and there's a chance this could be the place Alexander built his famous city, Alexandria on the Oxus. These desert lands are totally unpredictable, and a sandstorm is fast approaching.
Well, we've made the river and the boat's here, but we've now got this big sandstorm. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. We'll probably get through, but it means it's going to get dark really quick.
The ruins of Kazal lie out on the edge of this delta, and it hasn't been explored by outsiders for decades. Nowadays, this is a Taliban problem area, and the crossing is guarded by local police. But our immediate problem isn't the Taliban, it's getting across. These waterways are in a constant state of flux as the river level slowly drops throughout the year, then floods every spring, cutting the villages of the delta off from the rest of the country. Over 2,300 years ago, the crossing would have been almost exactly the same for Alexander and his 55,000 strong army. On their 3-year-long campaign through Central Asia, they braved this harsh, constantly changing environment and hostile tribes. Today, in the heart of the Kunduz Delta are many villages with Taliban sympathies.
From Australia?
از استرالیا اومده.
Very long way. Australia.
We're escorted to the police post and an audience with the local commander. He's expecting us, but he's got no idea why a foreigner has come out here. And it takes a bit of explaining.
You can tell them this is a program you can get. I don't know if they know Google.
They?
Yeah, these guys.
They know, they don't know.
Okay. To explain what this is not military. Okay?
Yeah.
You can, on your computer, you can have this program, and it's made up of lots of different satellites, and we can zoom down. But you can explain it to them, how I have this photo.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because they might be wondering why. They probably think I'm a spy, you see, and that's all it is. It's just a printout from Google Earth.
Yeah.
But here, this is pretty revolutionary, to be able to look in on a place like this. So I'm just wanting to reassure them that I'm not a spy.
در واقع مردم تشویق کنیم که بیاین اینجا ببینن. مردمای دیگر تشویق کنیم به جای شما رو ببینن.
در استقامت پر میکنیم میگن که راتی که بود کدام خدمتی که بود ما در خدمتتون هستیم.
Eventually, we gain the commander's trust and get the all clear to explore Kazal. Habib, our driver, makes a few adjustments just to keep at least some of the dust out of the engine. Out here, breakdowns are not an option. From a distance, Kazal seems little more than just another flat-top hill beside the ancient Kunduz River. It's not until you reach the first line of battlements that you start to get an idea of the size of Kazal. Its walls are more than 6 kilometres long. The ruins of a fortified citadel, or arg, are clear to see.
Well, this place is enormous. Even after the river's actually come through here and gouged out part of the fortifications, you can see that it really would have repelled all comers. But the riddle is, who built it? What it's pointing to is that the Greeks built it. These huge great squares, and then this enormous arg that would have sat up above here.
This site is so remote and hard to reach, it has never been excavated. So much of its story remains a mystery. Alexander's biographers tell us that more than 2,000 years ago, the Oxus and its tributary, the Kunduz, joined here and then parted again. Looking out, it's clear to see that even today only a narrow neck of sand separates the Kunduz from the Oxus. So Kazal was strategically built to keep watch over the two rivers, the delta and its approaches. But its layout and design suggest that this was once a bastioned Greek city. Walking across these ruins, I really get a sense of Alexander being here.
You know, one of the things about climbing over places like this is you're actually climbing through history. And as you move around, you could think back to what it would have been like living on this river, perhaps as a Greek stationed here for the rest of your life. I don't know if it would have been soul-destroying or uplifting. It was a totally different world for them and me.
Greek sources tell us in the spring of 328 BC, Alexander's armies crossed the Kunduz and then the Oxus to try and put down a local rebellion. And the only place it's possible to cross the two rivers is right here at the ancient ford of Kazal. This could be Alexander's city, but there's a problem. The surface pottery only dates back to a time 400 years after the arrival of Alexander.
Yeah, I think so. It's for putting the wheat and rice.
And the big pieces.
Yeah, very big pieces.
The truth about Kazal's origins must lie in the layers of archaeology deep beneath this citadel's massive foundations. I can't be sure if this was Alexandria on the Oxus, but there's no doubt that he would have left soldiers here to man this strategic passage and secure his supply route. Control of vantage points like this was the key to Alexander's success. From here, he took the fight north across the rivers to suppress the fiercely independent Bactrian and Sogdian tribes. We're told Alexander had a fearsome army. There were 9 infantry units, amongst them thousands of archers and shield bearers, accompanied by over 4,000 cavalry. But to truly crush all resistance, he would have to do more than win battles. He had to maintain control of trade routes and waterways. For the Greek troops left behind to garrison local towns and villages, life would have been similar to that of these Afghan policemen today.
That's very good.
Welcome. Welcome to Kazal.
Thanks. Hello.
We're staying in their barracks for the night.
Oh, this is great. This is fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get the bag.
The policemen are not from around here. They're recruited from other parts of the country for a very good reason. Here, the law of the land is still dominated by tribal politics. It would be impossible for a local not to be drawn in to a web of intrigue and corruption. So the police are outsiders in this community, just like Alexander's men 2,300 years ago. For the Greeks, it would have been a hand-to-mouth experience, stationed here at the end of their known world. Just a small unit, a daunting 4,000 kilometres from their Mediterranean homeland. They had no choice but to make alliances with Bactrian and Persian chieftains. And the two cultures that had once clashed began to mix. So far, we've followed the route of Alexander's army to Kazal. But I'm not sure that this little-known ruin could ever have been more than just a Greek garrison in Alexander's time. Now, I want to explore a place that's far more famous. It's a site called Aï-Khanoum, an Arabic name meaning the city of Lady Moon. Aï-Khanoum is the only ancient Greek metropolis ever discovered in Central Asia. It's a place many believe to be Alexandria on the Oxus, and it's right on the Afghan-Tajik border. After a secure night at the police barracks, we're back on the move. I've met up with Jamshid, a local guide.
It's just so green. I hadn't expected it to be so fertile here.
Well, this is the time that, people are working on their fields, and they just start growing melon, watermelon.
Our next challenge is a formidable one. Aï-Khanoum is right in the forbidden military border zone. It's so highly protected, we first have to stop at the nearby city of Talokan to get special permission from the governor of the province.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
And we're going to the areas that you feel. He said that then, if you have any problem, call me.
Right?
Yeah.
The governor has actually had to go off. He's got a problem in a different part of the province. But he's told Jamshid that we can go up, but if we have a problem, then we should come back here and have tea with him. Trouble is, that's hours away. So we'll have to wing it a bit. We're going to get a letter of permission. We'll see how we go.
The wheels of bureaucracy do turn, but at a leisurely Afghan pace. This is one part of my journey that Alexander definitely wouldn't have had to do. It seems to be taking forever. So I head outside for a stroll through the Talokan markets. Sadly, few outsiders ever have a chance to experience everyday life like this. The threat of attack on Westerners makes it almost impossible. The ancient Greeks were among the first Westerners to come here. They stood out from the crowd, just like me.
So what do we have?
Rice and then the resin and some meat.
When he conquered Bactria, it's said that Alexander adopted Persian dress and acted out local customs to ensure his leadership was accepted.
Okay, you have got our.
Well done.
Bunch
We
of
need all
papers.
these?
Yes, we need all the place you're traveling. We need one paper for the people.
But so for the
government.
police and for the government.
Police, for
Okay.
government.
Okay, well done.
Like Alexander, we're heading north to the rugged terrain of Aï-Khanoum. This is one of the poorest regions of Afghanistan. In this arid landscape, only the river valleys can sustain life. But we hit a major obstacle. The bridge across the river has been out since heavy floods almost a year ago. We've no option but to head downstream to find another way across. Just getting through the mud to the crossing point is a trial in itself. Here the villagers have hit upon a cunning scam. They intentionally keep the road muddy to bog vehicles, then charge to help them out. And since we're foreigners, the price goes up from $5 to $60. I guess we should have brought our own donkeys. We get hooked up to the tractor, and it looks like we'll be across in no time. But we don't get very far for our money. So we resort to Plan B. The tractor driver guides us through, and some locals lend a hand. Jamshid's off-road driving skills get us safely back onto dry land.
Well, we've been travelling almost all day, done about 3 different police checks, drunk a lot of green tea waiting for our permits, but we're finally here. This is Aï-Khanoum. and it's absolutely vast. We haven't had a look at it yet, but it's a whole mountaintop. It just looks mind-blowing.
The site was officially discovered by the Afghan king Muhammad Zahir Shah during a hunting expedition in 1961. And when French archaeologists began excavating, they found a sensational series of ruins that were unlike anything else in Central Asia. We set up camp above the Oxus next to the border post. It's quite likely that a division of Alexander's army set up camp right here too. This would have been a strategic position guarding the river crossing into Sogdia. Across the river is Tajikistan. Ever since the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, this has been one of the most heavily defended borders in Asia. Next morning, we start to explore what remains of the city of Aï-Khanoum. The first thing we spot are the scars in the earth, made not by ancient hands, but treasure hunters and modern conflict. In 2001, this region was the front line between the Afghan Northern Alliance and the Taliban. Trenches and tank dugouts are still clear to see. The Taliban never succeeded in taking northeastern Afghanistan. Aï-Khanoum's ancient defences were too formidable. These ramparts seem just as impenetrable today as they would have been in ancient times. It looks like a barren borderland, but 2,000 years ago, this was a huge classical city. If you look closely, there's the imprint of magnificent structures all around.
Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people. Behind me is what remains of Aï-Khanoum, Lady Moon, a Greek city 4,000 kilometres from Athens. It's astonishing to think that all the way out here in Afghanistan, this was a Greek settlement. Here people would gather to be entertained, as traditional Greek comedies and Olympian games were played out in this immense amphitheatre. At its peak, 150 years after Alexander, Aï-Khanoum would have had all the riches and infrastructure you'd find in the greatest Greek cities of Mediterranean Europe. It stretched along the river for over 2 kilometres. There could have been about 10,000 people living here. Many were Greek colonists, and here they built a place that reinforced their Greek origins. Walking through the city gates, it would have been an awesome sight. Beyond the ramshackle dwellings and large stately homes was a huge waterside palace. It was a monumental statement of Greek power in Bactria. As well as being the residence of the royal dynasty, this palace was a centre for local administration. Further along the riverside was one of the largest gymnasiums of antiquity. Citizens of Aï-Khanoum came here to exercise, in particular soldiers. Inside, they trained for public games. Competing against each other in wrestling and archery kept them in a state of constant readiness for battle. The temples of Aï-Khanoum reveal that in this new city there was a fusion of Eastern and Western beliefs.
Some were dedicated to ancient Greek gods, but others, like this Persian-style temple, likely belonged to one of the world's oldest religions, known as Zoroastrianism. Here, ceremonial fire towers represent the triumph of truth and light over darkness. Presiding over the battle was one god, Ahura Mazda. Aï-Khanoum was a beacon for the Greeks on the empire's eastern frontiers. To many academics, its grandeur confirmed the heroic ideal of Alexander. Here at last was what appeared to be one of the great cities he'd built in Central Asia. But is this marvellous place really Alexandria on the Oxus?
So here, in the only Greek city ever discovered in Central Asia, do we see the hand of Alexander? Well, apparently not. Archaeologists can't quite agree when major construction began here, but they think it's around 280 BC. Now that's nearly 50 years after Alexander came through here.
For 200 years, this was a vibrant capital of the East, a satellite of Greek custom and learning. But Alexander couldn't have built Aï-Khanoum. After nearly 3 years of almost constant warfare, in the summer of 327 BC, Alexander left Bactria with the bulk of his army. 4 years later, he would be dead, and the forts and cities he'd briefly conquered were quickly abandoned. So who did build Aï-Khanoum and why? The origins of this place are still shrouded in mystery. And it's because a huge amount of the archaeology has simply been erased.
You know, every day in the fields outside Aï-Khanoum, astounding discoveries are made by farmers like Khalil here. They find coins, they find gold, and sometimes even statues. But the great problem is, what does he do with it? Because in Afghanistan now, it's totally illegal to trade in antiquities. If he keeps them, he could be arrested. If he sells them, he could be arrested. But there's no agency at the moment that he can give them to where he knows that they are actually going to be held for the people of Afghanistan to view them. Until that day, it'll remain in the black market, and the treasures of Afghanistan will go across the borders into Pakistan and around the world.
Some artefacts have survived the black market, and I've heard that a local chief has filled his tea house with artefacts from Aï-Khanoum.
Oh, wow. Well, this is amazing. I'd actually heard there was one column here, but there's about 6.
They've been covered with whitewash, but these column capitals are remarkably intact. Carved out of local stone over 2,200 years ago, they are priceless.
Well, the irony is that if the commander hadn't taken these away and he'd left them at Aï-Khanoum, they probably would have disappeared. So at least they've been conserved.
This has to be the most extraordinary tea house I've ever seen. The commander has certainly picked some fantastic pieces. But what he hasn't noticed is that all these columns are now upside down. In ancient Greece, Corinthian-style capitals would have been high up by the ceiling. So, if not Alexander, who could have summoned the resources and manpower to create a whole Greek city from scratch? After Alexander died, at the age of just 33, his military commanders carved up the empire he'd created. One general, Seleucus, would command an enormous kingdom that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Bactria. Seleucus kept control of the lucrative trade routes that crossed the lands Alexander had conquered. Caravans carted precious cargo like gold, gemstones and cotton from India in the east through Bactria all the way to Greece in the west. And the revenue would have been enough to endow the great city of Aï-Khanoum, the capital of this growing province. And if Aï-Khanoum was built by Seleucus decades after Alexander's departure, there is no way it could be the lost city I'm looking for. I want to find out what was here when Alexander and his army arrived. I'm on my way to check out an earthwork nearby, a place French archaeologists reckon to have been built during the Bronze Age. And what I find is magnificent.
Well, I'm about 5 kilometres out across the plain from Aï-Khanoum. What I'm walking down is an enormous canal. Now, this was dug by hand more than 2,000 years before Alexander the Great got here. Now, can you imagine how many people it would take to dig something like this? I mean, these walls are 50 feet high. This is not just nomadic horsemen who built this. This is a civilization that was advanced enough to actually employ the people to do it and then actually design this place. And it would have brought water right across the plain. It would have been an Eden here. So the question is, where was the great city that this canal fed?
It's not only the canal that has changed. It's hard to imagine a time when this was fertile ground. But once, the Oxus River followed a very different course than today. Signs are everywhere that in the Bronze Age, it flowed across the middle of this plain. Irrigation systems fed a series of villages and farms that flourished here. To date, only one has been excavated, and it's called Shorter-Guy.
Well, I know this place doesn't look like much, but in fact it's incredibly important. It was excavated by a French archaeologist named Frankfurt just before the Soviets came in. And what he discovered was this place was Bronze Age. It's more than 4,000 years old. But what was really exciting was that he found that this was an Indian trading post right here on the Oxus. Now today, the Oxus is about 5 k's away, that blue line you can see. But back then, the river level was higher and it came right in here. And so, this being an Indian trading post puts a whole new spin on everything.
Long before Aï-Khanoum was built by the Greeks, Bronze Age traders travelled all the way from the great cities of the Indus Valley in India. They came right across the Pamir Mountains by caravan, all the way to riverside outposts like Shorter-Guy. They carried painted pottery, gold and bronzeware. It was not only goods that travelled on these routes, but people, ideas and spiritual beliefs. Russian historians think the plain surrounding Aï-Khanoum could have been the birthplace of the prophet Zoroaster, making this the spiritual heartland of the revolutionary local religion, Zoroastrianism. But if this is true, there must have been a great citadel defending it. To find out more, I visit a man who knows this place better than anyone. General Khalil Halik looks after the 125-kilometre stretch of the Oxus River that runs alongside Aï-Khanoum. It turns out the general's passionate about the history of this area. He tells me that there's evidence all around the barracks we're sitting in. French archaeologists found surface shards thousands of years old.
It's actually called Konyakala, and as a customs post, well, it's not a bad position here on the river. But when the French came here in the 1980s, they only had a cursory look. They knew it was Bronze Age, but then they went back to Aï-Khanoum. But what's got me thinking is that Shorter Guy, that Indian trading post, is also Bronze Age. So it's given me an idea. But to have a look at that, we need to get a bird's eye view.
From the air, there's a clear footprint of a large structure, but it looks incomplete. The outer walls end abruptly at the riverbank. It seems most of the inner defences and the citadel have been swept away by the river. But if you fill in the blanks, this is what Konyakala originally looked like. A huge Bronze Age fortified town, over 1 kilometre wide and 3 kilometres in circumference. I believe that 2,000 years before Alexander, this was the capital of a highly advanced trading settlement beside the Oxus, and the holy city of the prophet Zoroaster. So how did Konyakala get wiped out?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the Oxus has changed its course and then swept right in here and taken away more than half of the citadel. The question is, what could have caused the Oxus to flood so much that it had the power to take this away?
The Oxus flows through a highly active seismic region. There have been more than 6,000 major earthquakes here in the last 1,500 years alone. Geophysicists now believe that in 2200 BC, a series of earthquakes laid waste to the Bronze Age world. These quakes were powerful enough to burst an ice dam hundreds of kilometres upstream. Unleashing a huge torrent of water.
So are we looking at the same event? Did a cataclysmic flood destroy this civilization as well? Well, the dates fit. 2200 BC, this citadel was probably here. And so if it's the same event, could well have destroyed it.
In an instant, the mighty Oxus River carved itself a new course, smashing through everything in its path. It ripped Konyakala apart. By the time Alexander arrived, only a fragment of this ancient city remained. But it was still Zoroastrian holy ground. I believe Alexander conquered Konyakala because of its spiritual and strategic importance. He then renamed it Alexandria on the Oxus. And 50 years later, his successors constructed their own sacred Greek city next to the old, the place we know today as Aï-Khanoum, the city of Lady Moon.
Well, it's terrific stuff, but unfortunately, these questions may never be answered. But what is for sure is that the Oxus really has changed its course, and in doing so, it destroyed a civilization that was here for thousands of years.
At last, I've started to unravel the mystery of Alexander's lost city. Through the ages, the legend of Alexander has become larger than life. His route was grueling, and the battles he fought were hard won. It's now clear to me that Alexander had neither the time nor the resources to build 16 cities along the way. Many of the cities he conquered were already highly advanced settlements when the Greeks arrived. When Alexander took over, these places were simply renamed in his honour. He did create his own forts and would have re-engineered city defences, but there's no sign of the great Alexandrian cities of legend, not even on the Oxus. Like the Greeks, we have crossed this hostile and unpredictable landscape. Here, Alexander carved out a foothold by capturing strategic crossroads. He left Greek garrisons and made alliances with local tribes. And in the thriving cities of ancient Bactria, he found the remnants of a civilization far more ancient than his own. Alexander laid claim to an ancient ruin. But it was the Greek colonists who came after him that built the first great Greek city in Central Asia.